Welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm Catherine Sabella, Project Director for the Transitions RTC, and we're really happy that you could all join us today. Today we'll be discussing young adult and youth involvement in mental health services research, making it real. This is presented by the Learning and Working Transitions RTC. Today our host will be John Delman, Associate Director of Participatory Action Research at the Transitions RTC, as well as Founding Executive Director of Consumer Quality Initiatives. John will provide an overview of community-based participatory action research and also discuss the unique aspects of involving young adults in mental health services research. We'll also hear from one of our young adult staff members at the Transitions RTC about her experience. There will be time for discussion and questions at the end of the webinar. Before I hand over the mic to John, I just wanted to give you some tips on using GoToWebinar for anyone who is unfamiliar with this format. As you'll see here, just a couple words of advice. Move any electronic handheld devices away from your computer and speakers. They tend to create some interference. And we also recommend that you close all file sharing applications and streaming music or video. You should have a little dashboard in the upper right hand of your screen. Check your settings in the audio pane if you're experiencing audio problems. You can join us through VoIP, which is microphone and headset, or you can also dial in. You'll probably notice that you are muted. All audience members are muted until the question and answer section. But during the presentation, you can send questions to the webinar organizer. So again, in your dashboard, there should be a pane where you can send questions. Again, we will have a discussion section at the end, and during that time, you can raise your hand if you would like to verbally ask a question. And that feature, the raising hand feature, should be in your dashboard as well. And again, if you're calling in over the phone, you should be able to, you have to enter your unique audio PIN so that we can unmute your line. With that, I will now turn it over to John, who will get started with the webinar. Before I go too much further, just wanted to let you know that we will be recording this, and it should be available on our website within a few days. Thanks, and hope you enjoy.
Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. I'm very excited to be doing this workshop on an issue that I've been very passionate about for many years, a decade I've been working on these issues, and having been a young adult myself with mental health issues, I'm really sensitive to this and wanting to see things improve. And the way I think things can improve in our system to support transition-age youth is really by involving community members and young adults in particular. So I feel like this is a two-part presentation. The first part is really the backdrop of why this is important and what are some of the challenges we face. And really in the second part I get into some more specifics as to how we can successfully do young adult participatory action research. I want to thank people for sending questions in advance. There's a lot of interest on how do we engage young adults in this research, how do we keep them engaged. So I'm going to start off by, I don't know if I have to remind people that this is like really important and it matters, but you know, if you look at any of the President's New Freedom Commission report that called for consumer involvement in research, both SAMHSA and NIDR, which is funding our project, really believe in young adult involvement and really pushed it with us, and we were happy to accept that push, and we're ready. We have a grant from the organization I work for has a grant from the National Institute of Mental Health to do a young adult involvement project and research. So NIH is embracing this, and when I refer to young adults, I'm talking about people between the ages of 18 and 30 with mental health conditions. I'm not talking about adolescents at this point. At least in Massachusetts, state government is really encouraging young adult involvement in many things. So this is the Learning and Working Research and Training Center that's sponsoring this call, and it is really giving me and the young adults here and the rest of the staff an opportunity to work with young adults and effectively translate whatever research we have into policy and practice. Some of these slides I'm going to move through quickly because you can always get additional backdrop for it. I want to add too that people can contact me by email if they have any questions. So this is the organization that I direct consumer quality initiatives. We're unusual in that we're a consumer-directed and staffed quality improvement, evaluation, and research organization, and our mission is to make a big difference through research. So why bother with this? And this is this isn't the actual copy of the Boston Globe article, but there was a Boston Globe article in February of 2003 based on a participatory action research project we did with young adults back in the early 2000s. And I'm not going to go through the details of how that project worked, although you'll get a sense of that, but we got outcomes and outputs. So this is an output. We got front page coverage in the Boston Globe that there was really no system in Massachusetts to support young adults. Everything is as it was written, the picture's different. Second, the Department of Mental Health adopted the recommendations that our young adults presented to them fully, which including youth voice, having special programs for young adults. And thirdly, the legislature added $3 million to support the Department of Mental Health in initiating young adult projects. Now that wasn't just because of us in our young adults, it was also because there were other community stakeholder groups involved, such as parents, providers, that really bought into the process early on, and when we completed the report, we were able to share it. So this really can work. Quickly, the model that I use is community-based participatory action research, which means that academia, or it doesn't have to be academia, but some research group needs to work with the community, particularly young adults, identify their unique strengths. That's something that is not always easy for people to do when you're working with people who are struggling. The research topic should really come from the community or the young adults, because that's what the policymakers are really interested in, not necessarily what researchers are working on. Here are some additional features of community-based participatory action research. Suffice to say that it's a lot of work, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. I'll spend a little time on the benefits, but there have been studies that consumer involvement or community involvement increases the quality of the research. As I mentioned, you have a relevant topic. As I mentioned earlier, if community members are involved early on, they understand the topic, they understand the research, they're right and ready to present it to policymakers. What really matters more than things in writing are verbal presentations. And when young adults can integrate their own stories into that, that's really powerful. It's good for researchers to get some education on what young adults are able to do. In green here, I've listed some items that are not specific to young adults, but really we are able to achieve some outcomes for the young adults working on the project, which is really powerful for me to see more as a policy person and a researcher. But you know, when we train people in research, not everything, but in basic qualitative research so they can conduct interviews and aspects of the mental health system, and as a result, they're developing some skills, some critical thinking skills, and it can lead to both something for the resume, but I have also seen it lead to jobs, and we did hire someone from a previous project at Consumer Quality Initiatives based on her work on a young adult project. People gain a lot of confidence when you give them a chance and when you work with them and you listen to them and you pay attention to them. And I have heard people say, wow, I've never been treated as an equal before, or I've never heard, people have never really listened to me. And this is what they're getting from this, and they're able to build on that and work to their strengths. Self-confidence, people develop a sense of hope that maybe there's a possibility that they can work. There have been additional studies that, you know, as people develop these skills, there are improved health outcomes, and people are more likely to participate in civic activities. And then the community capacity to partner in research is really around organizational development. So the challenges, which I'm sure everybody here is most interested in, and this slide is really important here on trust. You know, historically, outside of the young adult context, the community and academia have not been trusting of each other. I think we know some of the ugly stories, but certainly in the consumer movement, we haven't always felt like that the research is focused on our priorities, which might be peer support and recovery, and they're more focused on how academia views the priorities of NIH or whatever. And I believe myself personally that those can be married, but we have found that there's been a clash in priorities. So you have consumers, non-consumers. Researchers have the capacity, so we as non-consumers can get frustrated when we're really not listened to, and that's been the history. And as I mentioned before, experienced researchers don't want to spend a lot of time during a project getting new researchers up to speed, and that's a big part of community-based participatory action research. You really need to, and I think even like, which I do, work with new people on basic research skills. And as much as part of it is critical thinking, and other parts is how do you do a good research interview, which takes a lot of practice, and we have a developing curriculum on that. But you really need to do that to succeed in this kind of work. And then there's the young adult gap. You know, I think we've all been there as young adults, not trusting the older generation. And I'm not sure it's exactly the same these days, but, you know, young adults are coming up through a different technological era, and in many cases they have more knowledge than us older adults do. So how do we lay back as older adults and listen to them, and when they're likely to get frustrated because they know more, and in fact they do know more. And then on the other end, how are we as adults going to get ourselves to be relaxed with young adults? Because many of us have raised children, and that can often be enjoyable and tense, and we have to get out of the habit of thinking of these young adults as our responsibilities, but instead as our co-workers. So there's sort of a psychological shift that should be happening there. Quickly, trust building requires sharing planning authority, willingness to process. So if something's not working, people need to talk about why it's not working. And respecting the reasons why people may not trust, because people have legitimate reasons that can be alleviated if the good work is done together. And again, the flexibility to accommodate people's needs, whether it be some time off or a flexible schedule, maybe a little more time with someone. Here's a little bit more, but number 2 there, the infrastructure and funding is big. You know, when we have our NIMH grant, it is specifically for community-based participatory action research. So we build in, and we're expected to build in, a training component, as well as we do pay people on an hourly basis in that project and in this project here, because they truly are staff and collaborators with us. So before I finish up this section, There are, of course, certain challenges for young adults unique to them, and there is an element of developmental turbulence. As Marianne Davis often says, and which hasn't often been recognized, that this is maybe one or two or three different developmental stages within the ages of 18 and 30. And oftentimes, particularly when people are coming out of the child adolescent system, they're fried in a sense. They haven't had a lot of opportunities to build skills. They may be homeless or moving from home to home. They often haven't finished their education, or it's been interrupted. They may have a break with their family, and they may be in relationships that are kind of rocky. And this is true of a lot of young people, but I think more likely for people who have, it's not just people who have a mental illness, but people who have received services, which often interrupts a person's growth. And that's something you have to work with in this kind of work. Young adults also, when they come out of a child adolescent system, don't have generally a knowledge of quote-unquote empowerment and recovery. They often don't know they have rights. They feel, you know, they're used to being disempowered. So how do we encourage young adults to speak up and recognize that they have an opportunity to get better? I talked about the generations gaps before. I don't know who has more energy, adults or young adults, but sometimes we're just running in different directions and we have to find time to sit down and talk. And finally, obviously, they're less likely to have employment experience or advocacy experience. Many of us older adult consumers have been around, and I didn't work for a long time, but I've worked recently. But a lot of people need to learn essentially the culture of employment, and that's our job as you know, researchers working with young adults. And advocacy doesn't come naturally necessarily because many have been so disempowered by both their treatment or their illness. So we need to work with that, and in the second part of this, I'm going to talk more about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen now, one of our fantastic project associates, and she's going to talk a little bit about her experience here. Thank you.
My name is Jennifer. I'm 20 years old. I was diagnosed with bipolar depression and anxiety at the age of 12. Most of my life has been tough, but with each struggle I have gotten through it. I was given the opportunity at a young adult program to be a researcher's assistant. With that experience there, I have gained a lot of knowledge on how that young adult program has worked for young adults. With my experience from doing interviews, I was given another opportunity back in April to work here at the Transitions RTC. Working here at the Transitions RTC has been really wonderful. It has been a great opportunity to meet all types of people. The project that I am currently working on is the Young Adult Employment Study. On occasion, it has had its complications, from interviewing people, doing transcription, recruiting people, and probing some questions in the interview script. Before I could interview, I had to go through the whole training process with John Delman. Even though with every training session he taught me something new and he critiqued what I was doing. Interviewing people, I realized, can be tough. In reality, no one is the same. Everyone comes off differently. In the process leading up to the interviews, we had to go to certain locations to recruit people. It at times was rough. Different services had different feelings of this research study. On a really good note, we have done over 30 interviews so far. Each has been different, but has given us some of the information that we needed. It really does feel good knowing that you are someone who is trying to help better the services out in the community. Another project we are working on is the Voices for Hope page on Wikispaces, created by Nadia and I. This site is geared toward young adults who need and want to see the different services that are out there. Included in the Voices for Hope page are different kinds of subjects that are useful. For instance, an education page, medication and doctors page, substance abuse page, employment page. I really encourage you to spread the word and check this site out. Just a reminder, it is called Voices for Hope on Wikispaces. Last month, I went to California for the Alternatives Conference. I learned a lot from there and met some wonderful people. I had my own exhibit table to represent the RTC. Many providers and consumers were interested in what we do as a team here. They asked many questions about the Voices for Hope website and the research project we are doing. With them being interested, most of my business cards were taken. It is a wonderful place to network. The people there were so nice, I truly felt comfortable there. If I had the opportunity to go back to another conference like this, I would in a heartbeat.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much. So the next part of this, I really want to dive into some of the specifics of how we can make this work, how we're beginning to make this work. But first, a reality check. On this project, we, about 9 months ago, hired 5 young adults. And we currently have 2 working for us, and we're in the midst of hiring additional young adults. So that's a success, because everyone who worked for us had a good experience and learned something, even if this wasn't for them, either because it was a bad match, or because it was too far from where they lived, or because they were going through some health problems. We're hoping that they're back at some point, but we are hiring another group right now. On the other project I'm on, we started off with 6 people, and we ended up with 4. That's a success, because we're really paying attention to people's needs, we're keeping people involved, and we're thinking about how do we continue to involve additional young adults. It's not a static process, and as you all know, young adults age out themselves of their group, and some of them might go to school full-time, others might get a new job. It just is. Their lives change much more quickly, so it's not as simple, I think, as hiring, not to say it's simple, but hiring older adults. And I'll talk a little bit about that more. So in the next slide, I'm going to discuss what I see as the foundational principles of conducting young adult participatory action research. I actually have an article on my website where I talk about user involvement in mental health research, and this is not specifically based on that, but that gives another general picture of involving older adults in research. So again, this is based on 10 years of experience with 6, 7, 8 projects, I would say, some funded by the Department of Mental Health, others by here, NIH, and foundations. So in additional, I've read a fair amount of the literature, and at the end of this set of slides, we do have references. So I have more detail on this, but one thing you really need is a real commitment from the organization that is beginning to lead the project. So here at the UMass Department of Psychiatry and the RTC, both the leader, Marianne Davis, and the department as a whole made a commitment. So it's good if the leader of a project can make a commitment. But ideally, you want a commitment, you want to work to a commitment from the entire organization, the department, because ultimately you want this to be a long-term process. Doing community-based participatory action research project to project is difficult unless a philosophy is adopted by the organization that this is at least one way we're going to do things, and we're going to invest in the resources to support this way of doing things. So without that commitment, you can do a list. So The third foundational principle is establishing a cohesive research team with a focus on building young adult and adult alliances. So that's probably true for any research study, but I'm not sure it's ever really always achieved. The fourth foundational principle is establishing connections with community stakeholders in understanding their context, because the community stakeholders are going to help us researchers to both work with young adults and to translate our findings into practice. And finally, in some cases, you're going to want to provide young adults with an opportunity to receive special employment supports. When I say special employment supports, I mean supports that we in the office might not be able to provide, but are offered by special psychiatric rehabilitation facilities or something of that nature. Because again, a lot of people are just returning to work. They may still be struggling with their health. So I'm going to go over those individually. And I'm pretty stringent about this, having done this a long time and see things that work and don't work. But researchers typically aren't trained in at least typically in disseminating findings or working with outside groups. It feels foreign to them when they first do it. So you want people who, by committing to it, will also participate in projects a few times that they might not be leading, but that they're observing. Because doing it for the first time by experienced researchers can be difficult. And as I talked a little bit before about the buy-in of the organizational leadership, here at UMass, we have our leader, Marianne Davis, and the leadership of the Department of Psychiatry here, Doug Zadonis, is right there. So we know that if we need some flexibility, the department can help us provide this, and they'll support a grant like this that isn't just research. Supportive infrastructure is really being there for young adults if, I suppose just like with any worker, but if they're having difficulties, and sometimes people will be having mental health problems on the job, and again, we're not their caretaker, but just like any employee, I would hope that we as employers listen to them and try to direct them, and maybe even identify resources for them to get the help. Resource flexibility, that might be sometimes even a space issue. So let's say you're given a few rooms, and we started off with a very open space here that didn't give our young adults a lot of work privacy. So we've ended up listening to them and building in some private spaces for them. And we had to purchase some extra equipment, but we built that into our budget, knowing that we wouldn't get it right away. So you want to have that flexibility in your budget. Effective hiring practices. I guess this goes to a question someone had on the, someone posed a question about effective strategies for recruiting youth to participate in research. Well, contacts. From my own perspective, I've in Massachusetts have been a long time consumer leader participant, and I'm connected to an organization called the Transformation Center here that's a consumer-run organization that works with young adults on mentoring, on advocacy. So I have a network available to me, and part of it is because I'm a consumer. I work in the community as well as here at the research center. So in this case, I or somebody should be serving as a bridge between what the resources are in the community and what the needs of the research centers are. I know where the programs that are specific for young adults. In addition, we've been very creative in putting things on Craigslist or Idealist, and we've gone to meetings. In Massachusetts, they do have young adult meetings, and we've offered to go, and we've you know, recruited people at times who have been already active in young adult advocacy. In some cases, when I first started, there were no young adult programs. So I hit the pavement, and I talked to providers I knew, and when there were a few young adult housing programs, and I hit the pavement, and I just went over and I tried to excite them about participating in a research project. Didn't get a lot of excitement. Eventually, I got two people who worked with me, with two young adults who worked with me on the first young adult project that produced that Globe story, and they both were kind of a little bit iffy about it. So what that required was a lot of attention to what their particular strengths were. One was more interested in writing, and we helped her get some money to fund a writing collaborative for young women who are transitioning out, and she created a booklet, and she was involved in the other parts of the research, but we went out of our way to meet her needs. And then the other young man, in his pictures at the end of this presentation, I think, he was interested in politics, and he ended up meeting with a lot of the key policy people in the state, and he was very effective that way. And he participated in the research, but we really looked to where his strengths were. So we kept them involved, and we recruited them because partly it was hitting the pavement and being excited about the project. It's easier now from Massachusetts, but you still have to work at it, just like any sort of recruiting. And on to the second foundational principle. I just talked about the individual attention and support. I can't emphasize that enough. Strengths-based, you know, people have been, the young adults that we work with have been through a lot. I don't have to go into detail on that, but I guarantee you, if they want to do the work, there's something that you can identify that, even if it's a little bit tangential, can relate to the research. Because if you can get them on one thing, they'll work with you on the other key aspects of research. And you want to get a diverse group of young adults who have different interests, ideally, so you can serve that concept better. Task matching, you don't want to hire someone who isn't going to like the work. That seems obvious, but it happens. And if it does happen, you need to address it. The research, education, and training, the way we do it is very thoroughly. It's here and at CQI. We have a curriculum, and we talk about the basic concepts of research. It's classroom-based, but very interactive. We bring in a number of guest speakers, such as Marianne Davis. We've done that, and we try to bring in the researchers who are participating in the project. It's a good way for people to kind of get to know each other, and we want our young adults to hear about the context and the research history of the topic we're looking at. We also have community stakeholders come in, and in our first project, we had leadership at DMH come in and talk to our young adults, and that leadership invested in our project and actually aided us in getting the project done because it was just such a nice connection there, and everybody knew they were trying to improve services. It was very genuine. So that's part of the research education and training. It's not just the research principles, but it's about the topic, what's going on in the community around that topic. If you're researching housing, what kinds of housing exist out there, and meeting people who are really doing it. So it's not just one person doing it didactically. We use exercises and role plays. You want to identify the young adults' priorities for research. Now, we all know for getting grants, you have to come up with something. It's hard to get around it, something fairly specific, but once you get the young adults in there, I feel like you can generally create the freedom to either expand that topic or within that topic identify specific priorities. But the whole idea is don't get the young adults started just as you're developing the mechanics of the project, the interview guide. Have them think about the research question, which they absolutely need to know, and other priorities. Peer leadership, ideally, you may have some young adults who are particularly strong and can take a stronger role in the project. Typically, I should say, the young adults that we've worked with here and at other places work from 6 hours to 20 hours a week. That's a tricky thing, just like you're hiring any part-time person. So the cohesive research team, building trust, respect and tolerance. I emphasize tolerance. We all can be intolerant of other perspectives, and sometimes we just need to listen. Cross-training, I basically talked about. So we might have a member of the community, maybe a parents group come in, talk about their concerns and issues, and then the youth talk to the parents about their concerns and issues. And that creates a learning opportunity for both groups and possibly a strong understanding and working relationship. Clear communication with the team. You want to have consistent meetings because you can lose some young people. Some people are less likely to speak up individually, but you want to try to have meetings so that larger issues can be addressed. The Young Adult Alliance, well, we need some coaching perhaps in listening to young adults. Maybe not all of us, but I know I do. And, I'm 51. Maybe I feel like I know more. And there are things I know more about, but there are things they know more about. And they're the group we're trying to serve. So we need to listen. You need to be fairly consistent in your encouragement without being over the top. I don't know how to define that, but if people are doing great, mention it. If they're doing good, mention it. And, as Jen mentioned, I do offer critiques, but at the same time, if they're doing a good job, I'm encouraging. Feel free to take a step back and watch it happen. Be available, but, if you get a group of young adults together, they can really come up with some good ideas. And listen carefully to them because they may not be trained in a sense to particularly articulate what issues they're interested in, but they may allude to something that you as a researcher may want to follow up in. They don't, in some ways they speak a different language than researchers, or I should say researchers speak a different language than the rest of us. So there has to be some way of getting to know each other, whether it be hanging out for some coffee or muffins and whatever, but that has to be an important part of it. This I'll go over briefly, but as I mentioned before, you need to get out there and know your stakeholders, not just the young adults, but the policymakers, your departments of mental health or social services, and you need to keep them informed that from the very, well, you need to let them, I let them know that we're doing something from the very beginning. I try to get a support letter from many of these groups to let them know that I value their support and that I want them to say that they'll listen to our findings at the end, and I try to stay in touch with them, and it's always good to keep up with other reports that are coming out. Finally, and this I think is maybe not attended to enough, I think this has been sort of an ongoing learning issue for me, is supporting young adults in employment. I mean, we have, you know, of course, with any adult with serious mental illness, there, in many cases, people need different supports to succeed in work. There are cultural issues. There are personal issues. We as consumers often can feel conflicts coming on, and it can be very, very distressing. And that's also true of young adults. So my three general recommendations here are, for most everyone, you want to have some sort of internal mentoring. So that's at least some older adult taking on the role of checking with somebody. That's actually, in a sense, my job here. But other people here do it too. Job coaching people are familiar with. I'm not sure that works for everybody, but I'm going to move to the third one because this is something I've become very interested in for some people, and that is an employment specialist who's part of a larger treatment team. I guess it's called in many ways, the IPS model. And some people might object to this, but what I've learned is that for some people who have been through a particularly turbulent time, I would like to give the young adult and myself an opportunity for us to work with an employment specialist so that we can together address issues as they come up. I think for some people you can lose them because of stresses that are really difficult, but if you had a group working together, you can get by those first barriers. And I want to emphasize I would leave it to the choice of the consumer. But from my perspective, if I know some people have a larger team, then in some cases I might encourage the person to consider using that resource. So the other slides here are about that initial project we did. But that's really my presentation, and I encourage people to contact me if they have any questions after this.
Thanks, John. Hello, everyone. This is Catherine again. Just want to apologize once again for those technical difficulties. You can only plan so much for these kinds of things. I just wanted to give everyone the opportunity to ask John any questions. Hope you found his presentation as insightful as I did. After working in the Transitions RTC and working with young adults with mental health conditions for the first time, he has been an invaluable resource to us. Even watching this, though, I still learn something new, so that's always great. So at this point, if you have a question, you can raise your hand on the in your dashboard, and we can call on you. Some people did send questions ahead of time. I think John got to most of them. Let's see here. I don't see any hands raised. John, were there any questions that you got ahead of time that you maybe would like to speak about in a little more detail?
Well, I'll just reemphasize the question, how to keep youth involved in the process. You know, again, I really emphasize, and I didn't mention one thing, but a real active recruitment process through connections in the community as well as, say, newspaper ads. And I would hire in groups because people can complement each other well, and you are going to have dropouts. I mean, it's the nature of the beast. These are part-time positions usually, and some young adults need to move on, or they may have health problems. And at times you're going to need to replenish like we're doing right now. But you do want to try to keep people involved, and you need to really get to know them and assess their strengths and try to build on that. And if they're having health problems, you're not their caretaker, but you can show that you care and that you can refer them to resources, perhaps.
Thanks, John. So April just sent a message, but I think John kind of answered that a little bit about engagement. And as far as stabilizing them, I think from what I gathered on the in his presentation, I mean, I think working with their treatment team through an employment specialist sometimes is a good way to be involved and help them get through difficult times when they are on the team. Let's see. Annette would like to know what research projects we are currently working on. If John is okay with this, maybe I can take this one. The Transitions RTC has numerous research projects going on right now, and we encourage you to visit the website to learn more. Current research projects that the young adults are actively working on, I think Jennifer mentioned the Young Adult Employment Study. And what that study involves is talking and interviewing young adults on what is appealing to them about employment programs that they have been involved in. And the point there is not to evaluate the employment programs, the different options that are out there, but rather to gain insight from young adults on aspects of the programs that they liked and that they didn't like, and trying to see if we can come up with a set of strategic points that employment programs might be able to incorporate to make their employment programs that have been proven successful with older adults and to get them to work with younger adults. And some of those points do involve, such things as engagement, keeping the youth interested if you're working with them in an employment program, how to keep them coming back and that type of thing. We also work with Thresholds, which is a group in Chicago. They're collaborators on our research projects, and they're doing a research project kind of tailoring their employment program, teaming up with their young adult program and adding a peer mentor feature to the current employment program, and specifically targeting young adults out there. I do believe they are working with the peer mentors that they have hired to work on this, are obviously giving input along the way, and they are in the stages of kind of specifying what the model should look like, because the goal is to kind of come up with a manualized model, supported employment supported education model that would incorporate peer mentors. And Mary Ann Davis is also working on a project in New Haven, Connecticut on she's been looking at tailoring multisystemic therapy, which is, has been proven effective with children who have been involved in the juvenile justice system. And now she's looking at adding in a life coach to that as well. And we'll be working on some other studies that involve policy and the transition from the child to adult system, and working with the Healthy Transitions Initiative, which is a federally funded grant in several states to try to make that transition a little easier. Let's see. Do young adults come up with research questions themselves? This has been passed on to us. There was also a question about areas of interest that our young adult research team would like to pursue. So, John, do you want to take that one, or do you want to?
On the first part, in one of these projects, the research question was developed by another group of young adults. And then our group of young adults has come in and worked with the researchers, and they, as a team, we have a team, have refined it. On another study, our young adults, it's interesting. We worked with one young adult who came up, it's like the pre-grant, we were working with young adult, and he helped us with the research question. He helped frame it. And then by the time we got the grant, we had another group of young adults who then helped refine it. So, when I was doing my initial study on the needs of young adults, which was very broad, the young adults really did help frame the different areas that we were going to cover. So it's really facilitating a group, and like you'd facilitate any group, and try to identify priorities. What was the second question?
Actually, I think I was going to give, we have Nadia Ackerman here, another young adult on the Transitions RTC, and I was going to just let her speak briefly about a couple questions we're getting here are about what kinds of things the young adults are interested in pursuing. And the side question to that was, do young adults come up with the research questions themselves? The goal, and I think John might have just briefly touched on this, is once we're up and running and fully staffed again, is to work with the young adults to develop a research project that really comes from them, and is, you know, we have full ownership from them, and we've talked about this a little bit, but that is one of our more longer term goals, is to work with them and John will, under the guide of John, and develop their own research question and research project and really be involved in things from the beginning. I'm going to hand it over to Nadia, and she can tell you a little bit about types of things that she is interested in studying, even if they're things that the Transitions RTC isn't dealing with yet. Hold on one second.
Alright, so currently I am doing the research study, and I think it's going amazing. And for myself, I definitely enjoy the mental health field, and along with working, I definitely enjoy the criminal justice field. So I like knowing what the mental health systems can do for people with mental health conditions in any area that are having troubles, and I definitely would like to fix the systems that are having trouble and that people are not finding as useful. So.
Great, thank you, Nadia. One, you know, I just want to share with everybody one topic that came up recently here in the Massachusetts area. There was just an article in the Boston Globe recently, just last week, about young adults with mental health conditions being turned away from finding beds or inpatient care due to insurance delays. And it was a timely article because, you know, with all the healthcare reform going on and looking at how the healthcare reform will affect this population. But you know, our young adults had a very strong reaction to that, to the fact that they themselves have experienced difficulties getting the care they need due to insurance, and you know, they often feel overwhelmed by navigating those systems by themselves, and it often takes their parents helping them out and their doctors and somebody at the hospital kind of figuring it out. But if they're in an emergency crisis situation and they go to the hospital, they get turned away. So that was something that we had a kind of a lively discussion about last week, and you know, could form the basis for something coming down the road, especially with all the healthcare reform going on. I really appreciate all these questions. I hope we are getting to them. And one question, actually, John, maybe you want to talk about this. It might be a final good question. What minimum skills have you found to be important for young adults who work with you?
That's a good question. Ultimately, they may not have all of these skills when you hire them. I just want to, but ultimately I want someone who can work with other people, who can listen well and is willing to learn. They don't have to, as far as I'm concerned, they don't have to have any knowledge or education per se. It's really just about working with people and listening.
Great, thanks, John. I think you're right. I think from my experience, you know, working with others, and in some of the cases, these young adults are coming together as a team for the first time in a while, and sometimes it takes them a little while to get used to the team environment and listening to each other and respecting one another, and I think you touched on that a little bit in your presentation. So I don't see any other questions or hands raised. So I think this might be a good time to wrap up a little bit. On the screen right now you see our website. We encourage you to go visit and send us any questions or call us or email us. We will hopefully have a full copy of the webinar, definitely the slides, on the website soon. We really appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today, and again, we sincerely apologize for the technical difficulties. Thanks for those of you who hung on, and thanks for those of you who asked questions. And I want to thank you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to serving you in the future with any other webinars or more to come, more to learn. We're always learning, and we're happy to share what we learn along the way with you all. Thank you.